Okay, before moving on to binding this character, I thought I'd just cover one more thing. The joint tool, I double click to open up its preferences here, and let's go ahead and reset the tool. Um, so one thing you can turn on is the projected centering, which just means that when I click on a joint here on the model, it basically casts a ray in between the object and tries to find the center point in between the volume and places the joint there. And so, which you'd be like, oh, this is just fantastic, right? So, let's go ahead and turn that on. All right, so go ahead and put that. Yeah, we'll call that good. So I'll put this here, and I'll put that there at the wrist. So it's doing a pretty good job of centering that within the mass itself. So that's a plus. That's a positive. Go ahead and just set this up as if we were doing the joints for the hands. So you can see where this would be effective, though it's not doing a very good job with the scaling. The problem would be, so let me just undo, just leave that one there. So again, the problem still ends up being, how is that joint oriented, right? So you can see this is not bending kind of as a true hinge. It's not bad, but it's still, I wouldn't call this the right way that this elbow would bend. So again, we would go back up to the component mode, local rotation axis, which is available there. And I'll just select that, and let's just twist that a little bit so that when it rotates, it's going to rotate back towards that shoulder joint. So we'll go back to object mode, and if I select this, you can see that's going to rotate a little bit more correctly. Right? So again, the local rotation axis, there's lots of different ways to set up these joints. There's lots of problems we can create. Certainly, if we can, if it's a tune character or something, especially, it'd be a better idea to create more of a T pose with the legs straight and the arms straight out. But again, there are schools of thought where maybe it's better to have a slight bend in these limbs. All right, so now we've covered that. Let's delete that, and we'll go back to the skeleton that we drew out kind of in part one of this. So now I'm going to do the binding. And again, the whole idea is that it's going to look for points that are close to joints and associate them with that part of the skeleton. So to do this, I need to select the root joint, and then I'm going to shift select the mesh or meshes that we're going to bind, and we'll go up. And it's very important, let me go back here, very important to freeze transformations and delete the history, especially from our mesh object. We're going to leave this in, so it's not in smooth mesh. So again, so we'll select the joint, we'll select the mesh, we'll go up, we're here in rigging still, we'll go to skin, bind skin, and I'll just hit reset settings. These are the defaults. I actually like to lower the max influence and the drop off rate because I feel like it goes around and it adds too many joints or too many joints to a given point. So I just lower it. That's my own thing. It's like cooking. Some people like a pinch of salt. Some people like to, 2 or 3 shakes. So we'll go ahead and hit apply. And now what we're going to have here, you can see, is that I get the rotation that I want out of this. And you see the deformation that's happening. Right? We'll go to this one. We're probably going to see, that's not too bad. Right? So we're getting a little funkiness back here. That's not bad. This joint, maybe it will have been a little bit better to place it a little further back. Right? But right now that's not bad. Let's see how this one works. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and bend this, and we'll work on this as the example. Okay. Yucky, right? What is going on right here? So once you've done the binding, what we need to use is the skin weights paint tool, to modify how this is set up. And we don't have any controllers on this, so the nice thing is we can go ahead and put this in some crazy position to to do the editing to figure out how the skin is working. Obviously that little thing is not working. So we can put it kind of in extreme poses and do the skin weight. And if you're worried like, well, how do I get this back to the original position? I just need to select the root and go back up under skin, and go to bind pose. So if I do that, that will put the skeleton back in its original position of where it was when it was glued to the mesh, right? So, and at this point, we don't want to have any controllers. We're just worrying about how the deformations work with this. So again, I'm going to go back to the leg here, and I'll do a little bend there, and bend. So that's obviously a problem. So I'm going to select the mesh, and the paint weights tool is right here. So I'll double click on that, and what happens is you can see there's now shading that represents how this joint, and there's a, this is where it'd be better to have these all named for the tutorial. I'm not going to spend all that time doing that. And lots of different buttons and ways to approach this. We don't really need to deal with that for now. All we really need to worry about is how to load that paint weights tool, and where and how to do this editing. So once we have this tool active, if we right click on top of the joint or the bone that's in between the two joints, if you want to think of it that way, I can come up to select influence or lock influence, show us affected vertices, lots of different things where you can check modify as you're working. So I'm just going to do select influence, and it shows me where that influence is, where those points are selected. What I want to do is I'm going to turn the opacity to 1, all right, of my tool, and I'm going to start painting. Let's go back to post. No, interactive. Yes. No, sorry. How did this move? My bad. So leave it interactive. Most of the time I use add. I never really want to subtract skin weights, and there's a way to change these values here. We're just going to leave the opacity at 1, and we can modify the value of how much we want to add this. So I'm going to actually leave the value at 1 and turn the opacity down just a little bit. I'm going to work fairly quickly. What I want to do is paint all the skin that clearly would be deformed 100% by this joint. It's going to get a little crazy here, but really most of that should be affected by this. And then there's going to be a blending. So some of this is going to be just like a big coarse modification, and then we'll blend those things together. So let's come back to this one, select influence, go ahead and paint through there. Right, so this is all, and so Maya's trying to blend some of the values, which is great in certain areas, but we don't need this joint affecting points up here, right? That's kind of foolishness. But we also, when we paint these, we don't want to paint the negative, because we don't want Maya to, if I say, well, don't let this joint affect these points, Maya might say, oh, well, there's a joint over here. Maybe this one should affect those. So it's better to say this is what you want and not what you don't want, right? Okay. So I'm just doing a little painting, and as I'm moving along here, if I'm getting results that are a little funky, like let's say down in here, first of all, I can modify the size of the brush, so holding down B and left mouse button side to side. I can paint in sections if I want right there. So that's a little hardcore. I'm going to turn this opacity down a little bit. So that's pretty close, and obviously this is a difficult character because there's all the muscles in here. Let's turn the opacity up. Right, so there's a lot of bending going on in the model that makes this pretty difficult. So once we have it here, and I'm being pretty coarse with it, we can come back and kind of blend in okay, where some of those transitions are, bring this back into approximation with it. We can also hit flood several times and just do kind of a global blending into those sections. And we'll go back to add, we'll turn down the opacity quite a bit, and get a little bit bigger. Right, so you can see this can be a time-consuming process of really figuring out how the deformation works, especially again with a character that is beefy. Tyler, it's a pretty beefy character. Right, and you have to make decisions about how the muscle structure works on your character and what's going to happen here. And let's go ahead and grab this joint. Let's see how this is deforming a little bit. So you can see that's not quite right in there. And how this folds, I mean, that's a tricky thing. That's why you're not going to get it perfect doing this method. But hopefully you can get it close. So let's go back, select, make weight tool. And if we need to, let's do select influence, and let's try to blend this one a little bit. Replace, add, there we go. We'll turn the opacity back up. Really have to crank that on the blend, or the smooth sometimes, to get that to work right. Right, so I mean, there's lots of different ways you can try to do this. This is my own personal recipe for relative success. And add. Okay, so I'm not going to get too crazy there, but you can see we're getting close. At least this isn't folding. I think you remember before. I think the other thing too we can see is there's a little bit of silliness going on where this one is affecting the other leg just a little bit right there. Right, so not bad. Better than, let's see what we had here. Originally we did this, and we had deflate leg. Right, so here we get it where they kind of intersect with each other as it folds, but at least our calf muscle doesn't completely collapse, right? So that's the process there. You would use this all over the place. When we're done, we want to get back to a certain position. Again, we just go to skin, go to bind pose, and set that up, right? So it's up to you to edit this however you would like to get the kind of deformation you would like. And I think we'll end with that one, and then the third tutorial we'll look at how to create a little control rig so we can pose this character.